probably shouldn't have said anything. That's a regret I have. I really shouldn't have said nothing. Because we not in the same league, though. Just because a person sits on the show and don't hesitate or say or and speaks eloquently, that don't mean it's true. I think that's kind of like hate and jealousy. And hate and jealousy is a form of grief.
For years, rumors have been spinning about Steve Harvey's behavior behind the cameras, but Katt just cranked the heat all the way up. His outburst wasn't just a casual call-out, it was a full-on detonation. He didn't just question Harvey's attitude, he tore open the glossy image of the man America calls the TV king. Katt's words made it sound like Harvey's charm, and jokes might be hiding something way deeper, something darker, something fans never expected. The way he said it, it felt like he was hinting there's a whole other Steve when the lights go off, one the audience never gets to see. Is Steve Harvey's clean, polished image just a cover-up for something messy underneath? Let's break it down. When Ryan Clark mentioned Katt Williams during that interview, you could literally see Harvey's calm mask start to crack. For weeks, people had been throwing shade his way, poking, questioning, and dragging his name through the chaos that Katt unleashed on Shannon Sharpe's explosive Club Shay episode. That interview flipped Hollywood upside down, and Harvey had been trying to stay out of it, acting unbothered, brushing off the noise like it was nothing. But when Ryan brought it up again, that cool demeanor slipped, just for a second. But it was enough. His tone got sharper, his body language tightened, and those next few words, they said way more than he probably meant to reveal. It was the moment fans realized maybe there's truth behind all that smoke. And maybe, just maybe, the TV king ain't as calm and untouchable as he seems. Steve Harvey almost sounded regretful when he admitted he shouldn't have fired back at Katt Williams in the first place. He even went as far as saying that if he could rewind time, he'd just look at Katt and ask, "What's wrong?" Sounds sweet and sympathetic, right? But don't get fooled by that calm delivery. The real message was hiding in the tone. That wasn't compassion. That was shade dressed up as concern. Instead of addressing what Katt actually said, Steve flipped it and made it about Katt's mental state. Like he was saying, "You must be off to come at me like that." Smooth move, but slick. He didn't clear his name, didn't defend his actions, didn't deny anything directly. He just changed the focus. That's not damage control, that's narrative control. And anyone watching closely could feel that tension in the air, like he was trying to steer the story away from the accusations and toward Katt's personality instead.
And because you finally did it, because you had no other choice, and now that he gone, you gonna act like he wanted to be a movie star. You stop it. You stop it.
It's the kind of subtle spin only a media veteran like Harvey could pull off so effortlessly, smiling through a statement that says, "I'm not guilty, I'm just misunderstood." And it didn't stop there, and not even close. Steve Harvey came back swinging, throwing a dagger straight at Katt Williams' credibility. He said, just because a person sits on a show and don't hesitate or say or ah and speaks eloquently, that don't mean it's true. Oof. That line hit like a punch disguised as wisdom. In plain words, Harvey was calling Katt a smooth-talking liar, saying he might sound smart, but he's selling stories, not truth. That's where things took a wild turn, because the more Steve tried to downplay the situation, the more his composure started to crack. Think about it. If Katt's accusations were just nonsense, why not brush them off with a laugh? Why sound so tense, so defensive, so pressed? The moment Harvey leaned into those jabs, fans started wondering if Katt might have struck a nerve. There's something about a man trying too hard to act unbothered that screams he's bothered. Harvey's whole vibe was, "I'm above this." But the tone, the eyes, the way he clenched that jaw, that wasn't peace. That was pride under pressure. And here's where it gets even messier. Harvey's delivery had that fight energy, the kind that says he's trying to play victim and boss at the same time. Like he's painting himself as the man unfairly attacked while low-key daring Katt to come back swinging again. That kind of double talk, it doesn't clear the air. It clouds it up even more.
Because a person sits on the show and don't hesitate or say or and speaks eloquently, that don't mean it's true.
Every time he opens his mouth to move on. And here's the real shocker, the twist that makes this whole feud explode even louder. Katt Williams isn't just any comedian. He's the one who says what everyone else in Hollywood's too scared to whisper. He's built his name by dragging shady deals into the light, exposing fake friendships, and calling out those slick backroom moves that keep the same few stars on top. Meanwhile, Steve Harvey's the complete opposite. the smooth-talking, perfectly polished poster boy for corporate America. He's the man networks trust to keep things clean, family-friendly, and controversy-free. So this ain't just a fight between two comedians. It's a full-blown culture clash. On one side, you got Katt, raw, unfiltered, and unafraid to ruffle feathers. On the other, you've got Steve, wrapped up in suits, smiles, and sponsorships. It's real versus rehearsed, truth versus image, chaos versus control. And when Steve said, "I shouldn't have responded," he might have actually been right. Because every time he does, people start asking the question he's been trying to avoid. What is Steve so desperate to keep under wraps? Then came the bomb that set the whole internet on fire. Katt's sit down with Shannon Sharpe on Club Shay Shay, a conversation that went viral so fast it practically broke timelines. He didn't hold back. He scorched everything and everyone in his path, from Steve Harvey to Kevin Hart, from Chris Tucker to Diddy.
Shouldn't have said anything. That's a regret I have. I really shouldn't have said nothing.
But here's where things start getting real suspicious. The kind of drama that makes Hollywood hold its breath. Katt Williams didn't just accuse Cedric of stealing a joke, he swore that Cedric admitted it behind closed doors. Not only that, Katt claimed that Steve Harvey himself also apologized for the same thing. If there's even a shred of truth in that, then Cedric's public denial starts looking less like honesty and more like a cleanup mission, like someone trying to patch up a crack that's already spreading fast. And Katt didn't let up for a second. He turned Cedric into a running punchline. He clowned his Hollywood career, took jabs at his weight, and even implied that Cedric never really made it big after the original kings of comedy. That one hurt because Cedric and Steve weren't just co-stars. They were branded as brothers, the kings who stood side by side, selling out arenas, cracking jokes, and projecting that perfect image of brotherhood and unity. Fans saw them laughing, hugging, and hyping each other up on stage, but behind the curtains, the vibe was different, way different. For years, people in the industry whispered that their friendship wasn't as solid as it looked. Some insiders claimed Cedric had long been irritated by Steve's towering ego, while Steve, on the other hand, allegedly saw Cedric as the second funniest king, always a step behind. What looked like mutual respect might have really been quiet competition. Two powerful comedians locked in an invisible tug-of-war over fame, spotlight, and status.
We not in the same league, though. We shooting at two different baskets. I shouldn't even have said nothing.
And here's the kicker. That shiny Hollywood preacher persona that Steve wears so proudly, word is, that's the very thing that rubbed Cedric the wrong way. It's like he couldn't stand the act. The motivational speeches, the self-help wisdom, the flawless TV image. To Cedric, that wasn't authenticity, it was performance. And when Katt dragged all that back into the open, it didn't just expose a feud, it cracked open the illusion of brotherhood that comedy fans thought would never break. The tension between Steve Harvey and Cedric the Entertainer only grew clearer as their careers started moving in totally different directions. Steve shot straight into mogul territory, hosting Family Feud, running a daytime talk show, becoming the face of Miss Universe, stacking radio deals, and even branding himself as a self-made motivational guru, preaching success and faith. The man built an empire. Meanwhile, Cedric stayed steady, but didn't climb the same mountain, holding down sitcoms, ensemble comedies, and side roles that kept him respected but not quite in Steve's league. To the public, it looked like Steve soared while Cedric stayed grounded. And behind the smiles, that quiet resentment started brewing like a storm nobody wanted to admit was there. But here's the real twist. Even back when they were close, the wildest story from their friendship exposed just how fragile that brotherhood really was. Steve once confessed that he and Cedric actually got detained at the Canadian border after a show in Buffalo. Picture it. Two of the biggest comedy names at the time caught up in chaos when things were supposed to be all laughs. The plan had been simple. Celebrate a successful gig by hitting the casinos with pockets full of cash they'd just earned. In Steve Harvey's own retelling, the whole thing sounds like a movie scene. Wild, loud, and just a little too smooth to be coincidence. He said they rolled up to the Canadian border dressed to impress, wearing flashy suits and dripping confidence, looking like pimps, as he put it. The Border Patrol took one look at them, and that was it. They got pulled out of the limo on sight. Officers sliced open their tailored suits, dumped out stacks of cash, and started running background checks that turned into a 7-hour nightmare. According to Steve, everyone in that limo had a record, so the border agents weren't playing around. Now, on the surface, Steve tells it like a funny look what we went through and survived kind of story. Two kings caught up in some bad timing. But when you peel back the layers, the tone shifts fast. It wasn't just comedy. It was ego dressed up as humor. Steve used that story to flex, to show off the money, the fame, the power he had even back then. He told officers they were the kings of comedy, making sure they knew who they were dealing with. But here's where it stings. In that whole retelling, Cedric became nothing more than a side character in Steve's movie.
That's how we got started. And it was rough, man, because it was just the three of us. And the first night we did it was a disaster, man.
The spotlight never left Harvey. The story wasn't their memory, it was his flex. Steve was the storyteller, the boss, the center, and Cedric just a prop in the punchline. That's the same dynamic fans and insiders have whispered about for years. Steve, always positioning himself as the top dog while his so-called brothers fade into the background of his success story. Steve in the spotlight, Cedric just a few steps behind. That's been the picture for years. Even when they were both caught in chaos or controversy, Steve always managed to make himself the hero of the story, the sharp-tongued savior, the one with the last laugh. He's always the man telling the joke, controlling the narrative, and walking away looking clean, while everyone else fades into the background. And for a long time, people close to them have whispered that Cedric hated that dynamic. He was tired of being in the shadows while Steve soaked up all the shine, on tour, on talk shows, and especially during interviews where Steve's name came first and last. When Steve reinvented himself as the clean-cut Hollywood mogul, hosting shows, giving motivational speeches, and calling himself a man of faith, it looked inspiring to the public, but insiders say that move cut deep. They claim Cedric saw that transformation as fake, especially since behind closed doors, Steve was known to be ruthless when it came to business, money, and respect. So when talk surfaced that Cedric allegedly had Steve's name on his hate list, fans thought it came out of nowhere, but it didn't. This was years of ego bruises, silent competition, and a friendship built more on branding than brotherhood. The truth is, what we thought was unity might have been a partnership held together by fame and contracts, not loyalty or love. And here's where things start to feel real suspicious. Why would Cedric even keep that old casino border story alive after all these years unless he wanted people to remember that Steve Harvey's past wasn't always so squeaky clean? Was it his quiet way of saying, don't fall for that perfect saint act? Or maybe it's deeper. Maybe Cedric's just done being written as the sidekick in Steve Harvey's version of every story. It's like he's finally reminding folks that he was there too, not just as background noise, but as an equal who got overshadowed by Steve's shine. Because let's be honest, those forced smiles on stage, the hugs, the brotherly banter during interviews, none of that could fully hide the cracks that ran underneath their so-called friendship. For all the kings of comedy hype, it's starting to look like their biggest performance wasn't on stage. It was pretending to be unbreakable off it. Two men crowned as brothers, bonded by fame, but split by pride and power. Cedric the Entertainer and DL Hughley have always played the part of brothers in public. Big smiles, warm hugs, and endless compliments in interviews. But fans who've been watching closely for years know something's always been off. That brotherhood never felt as solid as it looked on stage. Behind the scenes, their clash was deeper than comedy. It was style versus substance. DL built his name on sharp, no-filter political and social commentary. He's the kind of comedian who will call out anyone and anything without blinking. Cedric, on the other hand, carved his lane through smooth storytelling, family laughs, and everyday humor that made everyone feel comfortable. That difference made the Kings of Comedy lineup iconic, but it also planted seeds of tension. Word from backstage insiders says there were nights when Cedric and DL straight up argued over who should close the show. And trust, in the comedy world, that slot means everything. Because the closer isn't just another performer, he's the real king, the one the crowd goes home remembering. And both of them wanted that crown. Now here's where it really gets messy. Steve Harvey has spent years trying to shut down all those whispers, especially the ones about beef among the kings and the tension with the late Bernie Mac. During the Black Comedy in America docuseries, Steve swore that Bernie was a man's man, saying nobody could have ever mistreated him. But instead of putting the rumors to rest, that denial only made people talk louder. Because the streets have been buzzing for years that Steve, DL, and even Cedric didn't always give Bernie the respect he deserved behind the curtain. Exactly. And that silence from all sides just fuels the fire. DL's own history with Steve and Cedric has always been layered with tension wrapped in brotherhood. Remember, DL once admitted that the Kings of Comedy tour wasn't as united behind the scenes as people thought. He said, "We were brothers, but sometimes brothers fight." That line hit harder after Bernie's passing, especially since many fans believe Bernie was the real king, the one who didn't play politics or kiss rings. Now, with Katt reviving old wounds, people are asking whether those so-called brotherly bonds were just business partnerships built on shaky loyalty. DL's calm demeanor today might look mature, but to some, it looks like deflection, a way to avoid revisiting the ghosts of that tour. Because if what Katt's implying holds any truth, then the crown Steve Harvey wears might have been polished with betrayal, not brotherhood. Exactly. That move spoke volumes without him saying a word. Refusing to go on Club Shay Shay might have seemed classy on the surface, but fans saw right through it. When a man like Shannon Sharpe gives you a platform to tell your side, and you still say no, it starts looking less like dignity and more like damage control. Because let's be real, DL knows that once those cameras roll, Shannon doesn't hold back. The questions about Steve's alleged manipulation, Cedric's loyalty, and Bernie's mistreatment would have hit hard. And maybe DL just didn't want to relive that chaos, or risk saying something that could finally confirm what fans have been whispering for decades, that the Kings of Comedy weren't a brotherhood, they were a battlefield dressed in laughter. Exactly. And that last part is where things take a turn from friendly rivalry to something almost mythic. Cedric and DL's silent feud is one thing. It bruised egos, old resentment, clashing comedy styles. But when Katt brought Steve Harvey back into the mix, he didn't just stir drama. He cracked open a deeper, darker narrative. Katt's claim that Steve sold his soul to Hollywood isn't just metaphorical in fan circles. It's symbolic of what a lot of comedians say happens when fame starts demanding pieces of who you are. Steve went from the hustling stand-up comic to a man with multiple empires, TV, radio, books, beauty pageants. And in that transformation, some fans think he left the comedian's code behind. So when Katt dropped that line about Steve being some stand-up mother band, it hit like a gut punch. He was saying the man who once stood up for comedy now stands above it, guarded by deals, power, and maybe a few ghosts of brotherhoods that didn't survive the spotlight. And when you stack that next to Cedric's rumored hate list and DL's refusal to talk, one thing's clear. The Kings of Comedy crown didn't just make stars, it made scars. Exactly. That moment in 2008 was the spark that lit a decade-long flame between two comedic heavyweights. Katt Williams wasn't just calling out Steve Harvey for laughs, he was calling out what he saw as Hollywood favoritism. To Katt, Steve represented the kind of comedian who traded authenticity for mainstream comfort, while he himself stayed raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically real. That New Year's Eve comedy showdown became the defining symbol of their rift. Katt publicly claimed he could out-funny Steve any night of the week, and that confidence wasn't just bravado, it was a challenge to the hierarchy of black comedy at the time. Steve, on the other hand, brushed it off as arrogance, but his irritation showed through interviews and comments that followed. When Jamie Foxx jumped in, replaying Katt's insults on his own radio show, it poured gasoline on the fire. Suddenly, what began as two comedians battling for respect turned into a full-blown Hollywood spectacle. Katt's career soon hit turbulence, arrests, erratic shows, canceled tours, and that only fed into rumors that he'd been blacklisted. Fans began wondering if Steve's deep industry ties had something to do with it. And that's the irony. Both men were once icons of hustle, but while Steve became the establishment, Katt became the outsider. Their feud isn't just about who's funnier, it's about what happens when authenticity clashes with ambition and one man's rebellion becomes another man's empire. Harvey's defense might sound reasonable, a man trying to protect his peace in a chaotic world of fame, but to many, it only highlighted how far he's drifted from the everyman comedian he once was. The lawsuits, the accusations, and the old grudges tell a different story, one of power, ego, and control behind the polished smile. Katt Williams didn't just call him out, he challenged the entire system that turned comedians into commodities and friendships into franchises. His claims about stolen sitcom ideas, unpaid debts, and industry gatekeeping might sound outrageous to some, but for those who've watched the game long enough, it all fits a familiar pattern. Maybe this isn't just about Steve Harvey. Maybe it's about how Hollywood crowns its kings. and buries the rebels who refuse to bow. One thing's for sure, the kings of comedy may have ruled the stage, but behind the laughter, their empire was built on secrets, silence, and the kind of rivalry that never really dies. This story isn't over, because in the age of truth, every crown eventually slips. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories from behind the spotlight. Until next time, stay tuned.